For everybody joining us in the room. I really appreciate it. My name is Kaveh Galimpur. I'm the Vice President for the Center of Climate and Energy Solutions, a think tank based in Washington, D.C. And I lead the international team there. I really appreciate everyone taking their time from a busy General Assembly high-level week and also the Climate Week in New York to come and attend this. We have, I think, about 90 people registered online. And I think it was over 70 in the room. So really grateful to that commitment. We are joined by an esteemed panel, which I introduce shortly. But before I begin, I just wanted to let you know that this event's going to be recorded and it would also be posted online afterwards. So people will be able to access it, just so that you're aware. Hopefully that doesn't hold anyone back from saying what they really think. I know that Lillian will always say what she really thinks, which is good. And if there's time, we'll take some questions from the audience and also hopefully online. So the Q&A function online should be activated. And hopefully we'll get some questions from you there. But to start with, I'm very pleased to welcome Yalchin Rafiyev, who's the lead negotiator for the COP29 presidency and the Deputy Foreign Minister for the Republic of Azerbaijan, just to give some opening remarks. And I really do appreciate his commitment for being here, because as you can appreciate, he needs to be in 10 places at once. So Yalchin, please.
Good morning. Good morning, dear friends. Thank you, Kaveh, for invitation. And thanks to C2S once again, creating additional opportunity for us to come together in such an interesting topic to deliberate on and to share our views. So it's a pleasure to join you today as we look ahead to COP29 in Baku late this November. This moment offers a crucial opportunity to move from ambition to action, ensuring that the outcomes of the past conferences materialize into real-world impacts. COP29 will be another stepping stone. It must be a decisive moment for our collective climate future. Our discussion today, particularly around finance, transparency, and just transitions, will lay the groundwork for delivering tangible results in November. At the heart of our efforts is a commitment to elevate climate finance, secure meaningful adaptation, and implement the outcomes of the first global stocktake. The urgency of our mission cannot be overstated. The clock is ticking, and the science is unequivocal to keep 1.5 within reach. However, this challenge presents an opportunity for global leadership, innovation, and cooperation. And COP29 will be the platform to harness these forces. At the heart of COP29 will be climate finance. We cannot continue to make promises without delivering on them. The new collective quantified goal on climate finance, which we aim to advance, must reflect the scale and urgency of the crisis. It's critical that we ensure finance flows to those countries most in need, particularly those on the front lines of climate impacts. Finance is not just about the pledges. It is about building trust and unlocking the resources that allow nations to take decisive climate action. The COP29 will be a litmus test for the Paris Agreement in terms of the adoption of the NCQG. If we may conclude the negotiation process successfully, it will once again reinstate the importance of the Paris Agreement as the central pillar of the global climate architecture. But in case we fail, that will be definitely leading to the loss of trust and confidence of international community, mainly the developing countries, to the global climate architecture. We have recently launched one of our presidency initiatives, which is called Climate Finance Action Fund, which will catalyze public and private investment and support the most vulnerable groups. This fund will play a pivotal role in scaling up mitigation, adaptation, and research and development finance, ensuring that no country is left behind. We will also take forward the Baku Initiative for Climate Finance, Investment, and Trade, also called BICFIT, to align global trade with our climate goals, ensuring that sustainable development and green growth are central to our financial systems. The Climate Finance Action Fund that we have recently introduced has a distinct feature from all other climate funds that have been introduced so far. As you know, we have more than already 60 funds, that climate-related funds, and each of them have several features that are important for the global climate action. But what makes distinct our fund from others is its first time being sourced by the fossil fuel countries and companies. Another distinct feature is that it's a public-private fund. It will bring together both public and private sector representatives in a very noble mission to provide finance for the developing countries. Its funding mechanism also is going to be innovative. It will be both investment guarantee fund, providing assurance and guarantee to the private sector companies and business community to go and invest in the developing countries, but at the same time, it will have a rapid response funding facility that will make available immediate funding for the developing countries suffering from the consequences of natural disasters. Adaptation, as highlighted by the global stocktake, is another pillar that requires urgent attention. We are witnessing the impacts of climate change in real time, from more intense storms to rising sea levels, and many countries are struggling to keep up. COP29 will prioritize solidarity and scaled-up adaptation finance through initiatives like the Baku Harmonia Climate Initiative for Farmers, which will support food and water security and empower women and rural communities. We need to ensure that adaptation efforts match the severity of the impacts that communities are facing. Transparency and accountability are equally critical. Without trust, our collective efforts will falter. As we work towards the enhanced transparency framework, the biannual transparency reports will be cornerstone of our efforts to track progress, identify gaps, and ensure resources are deployed effectively. The Baku Global Climate Transparency Platform that we have recently initiated and established in Baku will support this effort, assisting developing nations in preparing and submitting their reports, while also providing the necessary capacity building. We encourage all parties to submit their BTRs ahead of the December deadline as a sign of their commitment to transparency and ambition. Today, in a few hours, we'll have a global transparency platform event at the UN headquarters, and you are all invited to take part in this event as well. Finally, inclusivity will be at the core of COP29 success. Climate action must reflect the voices of all sectors of society, especially those most vulnerable to climate impacts. COP29 will host the first ever Human Development Day, focusing on how climate intersects with education, health, and youth empowerment. Indigenous people, youth, women, and marginalized communities must be at the forefront of the solutions we pursue, as they bring invaluable knowledge and perspectives to the table. We are also committed to taking forward key elements on the outcome of the COP28, particularly the call to triple renewable energy capacity and double energy efficiency by 2030. At COP29, we will advance discussions on these crucial sustainable energy transitions, and our goal is to ensure that these signals translate into next generation NDCs to be submitted by February 2025 with the highest possible ambition. In conclusion, the road ahead will not be easy, but with determination, cooperation, and commitment, I have no doubt that we can make COP29 the moment when our collective ambitions turns into real, sustained action. The world is watching, and it is up to us to rise to the occasion. Thank you, and I look forward to working with you all to ensure that COP29 is remembered as the moment we took decisive action to secure a sustainable future for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yalchin. I know that you can stay for a few minutes, but you'll have to run to other meetings, but really appreciate that. And of course, climate finance will be a key focus of your COP, but I think a lot of people in the room and online will be really heartened to have heard other priorities that are dear to them and maybe that don't often get the attention, like the transparency, but also adaptation and other areas. And something dear to our heart at CTUS is the follow-up to the COP28 outcomes. So I would be killed by my team if I weren't to mention that we've just released 2 papers on the tripling of renewable energy and doubling of energy efficiency. And there's QR codes on all the seats, and there should be something online as well for the audience to look at those papers. But thank you so much for that. So I'd like to now introduce our esteemed panel. I have to introduce them, but I don't think they need to be introduced. We have Todd Stern, who's the former Special Envoy for Climate Change of the United States. We have my friend, Her Excellency Hajar Nassim, who is the former Minister of State for Environment, Climate Change and Technology at the Republic of the Maldives. Dr. Sandra Guzman-Luna, who's the founder of the Climate Finance Group for GFLAC. Hannah Al-Hashimi, who's the Chief Negotiator for the UAE and Special Envoy on Climate for the COP28 President. And Lilium Chagas de Muro, who's the Director for Climate at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil. It's very strange announcing formally a group of people that I consider to be friends. It's almost like announcing family with formal words. But I'd like to turn first to Todd, who, Todd, you were very closely involved in the negotiations of the Paris Agreement, and I would be also remiss not to mention that you've just published a book on that topic called Landing the Paris Climate Agreement, October the 8th. I'm slightly upset that I don't have a signed copy already, but apparently they don't exist yet. So, but I've been promised one. But having been involved in that whole process in the years up to that, we've now essentially at COP28 almost seen a full sort of turning of the wheel of the ambition cycle. And I know that's something that was very dear to your heart. So, I mean, to kick things off, NDCs are expected, new, more ambitious ones on the 10th of February next year. And really, in your view, is the Paris Agreement working? And what might we expect from the US in terms of leadership, do you think, going forwards?
Thanks so much, Kaveh, delighted to be here with all my co-panelists up here. Look, my view is that the Paris Agreement has been working pretty well. I mean, not perfectly, but pretty well. And if you look back, you will see, first of all, the thing about climate change that has been the most outstandingly good in the last 8 or 10 years is the really spectacular performance of clean technology. And that was underway before Paris, but I think I subscribe to the view that was articulated by the firm Systemic in London, who wrote a paper back some years ago called the Paris Effect. I think the message that Paris sent out around the world to boardrooms and states and innovators and so forth, I think has really helped to spur that progress, which is so good, actually. It could get us to the transition that we need on time if there weren't obstacles. There are obstacles, but we can get to that later. But so I think that's been very, very good. I think that there were other important things that happened as a result of Paris. In 2018, two things happened. One, there was at this point pretty iconic IPCC report on 1.5 degrees, which really changed the whole orientation of the climate world with respect to emissions and temperature. And that didn't just happen. That was called for in a not very much noticed little provision of the accompanying decision in Paris, but it was called for in the Paris Agreement. I think that was also terribly important. And the rule book that was needed to make Paris really fully operational was mostly finished, probably 90% finished, and finished in an ambitious and impressive way. So I think all of those things were really good. And I think that there have been at least 2 quite important COPs, in Glasgow and even more Dubai. I mean, I think that there are promises in Dubai that were made in Dubai that are absolutely crucial. And that, to me, the most important one is the provision calling for transitioning away from fossil fuels in a manner that is consistent with the science and consistent with 1.5 degrees by 2050. I mean, if countries live up to that, that is an astonishingly important promise. Whether they live up again, big question, but that was really, really good. So a lot of good things, also some bad things. If you look at emissions, they're not where they need to be. They're actually moving in the right direction. A lot of countries are moving down, and countries, particularly developing countries that are still moving up, are moving up a lot slower. But we don't have time for performance at that level. We need better performance. And I think that there is, in my view, probably most importantly on account of the kind of forever problems that we have on the subject of finance, there is still, I think, a lot of acrimony in the workings of the Paris Agreement. I think if we could over time get to an orientation that was more partnership and less acrimony, it would be helpful all around. So I think that Paris has a ways to go for sure, but I think it's doing quite well. And I do think that people who say, oh, we're not doing well enough, we got to get rid of Paris, they're not understanding Paris, and they're not understanding what needs to be done here. Paris can't do it alone. Paris depends on countries stepping up and doing things that are agreed in Paris.
Thank you so much, Todd. I think, well, before turning to Haja, I just wanted to ask you briefly a quick follow-up. I mean, the key to the outcome at COP29 in Paris was the US-China relationship. You were absolutely core to that, and I think with the stepping away from his role of Secretary Kerry, and also your friend Xie Xinhua, and also you not being with the administration, that it's sort of a passing of an era in that relationship. What do you think the state of play of that relationship is now, and do you think it will be key to the success at COP29 and COP30?
Well, the relationship is enormously important. I mean, it was, I would say that the US-China bilateral relationship was the most important bilateral over the whole 7-year period that kind of led up to the Paris Agreement. I think that both countries at the climate change level, I think both countries have been trying to, certainly the sort of climate change leadership, have been trying to work together. That was certainly true with Secretary Kerry and Xie Zhenhua, who was still there. Also true with John Podesta, who has stepped in when Secretary Kerry left. Mr. Xie is now no longer there, and Liu Zhenmin is in his place. And I think John is working, and his team are working hard with them as well. The difference in the overall relationship, though, is just central. And it always seemed really hard when back when I was at State, the nature of the overall relationship. When we would meet with Secretary Kerry in preparation for the yearly S&ED, it seemed like everybody who sort of talked about their issue, the issue seemed like a mess, and climate change was the one place where we could actually make progress. So it wasn't easy, but it was very different from the way it is now. And I think that it is just as important, in my view, for the two countries to be able to work together on climate change. I think the argument that it would be helpful for the larger relationship is still true, more true, if anything. So I encourage that, but again, I think that the people working on those things, actually on climate, see that, but you just have to cross fingers that the larger relationship doesn't get completely in the way.
Thank you so much for that, Todd. I'd now like to turn to Haja. I think Haja definitely wins the prize for the longest journey to get here. So I definitely appreciate your, both in distance and also in terms of time. So really, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. So Haja, I mean, SIDS have, as we heard from Yalchin, the climate finance is going to be a central part of this COP, and we'll hear more from Sandra on that. But the small islands have been pushing for many years for outcomes on loss and damage, and had really spectacular successes both at COP27 and particularly on the first day at COP28. I still couldn't quite believe that one of the main outcomes of a COP was agreed on the first day, and the fund was capitalized to some extent. But I think the SIDS have been pushing very hard for a recognition of loss and damage within the new climate finance goal. Are you confident that COP29 could deliver on that? And is that your top priority, or are there other things to look for?
Thank you so much, Kaveh. It's really nice to be here, and a very good morning to all of you. So of course, before I even start that, as a former negotiator from Maldives, loss and damage is really, really important because we are on track to surpass 1.5, and we're actually going into a real climate emergency, and we have less than 5 years. So given that the emissions have not been under control, and given that the climate impacts are on the rise, and given the losses and damages that countries are facing more frequently than ever, is very important for us. So how does this connect with the Loss and Damage Fund and the NCQG and getting the new goal? So I think as Kaveh mentioned, getting the fund has been a really instrumental and good moment for the most vulnerable countries in the developing world. And I've been very proud to be part of that. However, we also must be aware that the fund can only do so much. Loss and damage has to be addressed both for the economic and non-economic losses and damages, which also include very difficult topics of migration, of loss of culture and heritage, and other very challenging topics for small countries to even begin to discuss. And in terms of the finance, having a dedicated fund to address loss and damage is excellent, but it will only be able to deliver for the most vulnerable if it's able to mobilize resources at the scale that's required, that's able to address losses that are coming, that's commensurate with the risks that countries are facing. And that requires a larger thinking and discussions of how do we coordinate the international financial architecture and do the necessary reforms to ensure there's better coordination, coherence, and complementarity of all the main actors that are operating in the loss and damage space, which includes the UN institutions, but also the MDBs, and also parties. So this is a collective effort that requires the close coordination of all of these actors. So I think there has been lots of progress at the board, and we have heard the announcement of the new executive director for the fund. And this is a really good step. So we're getting closer to the operationalization of the new fund as a fifth of the World Bank. And I think one of the key things that's I think would be really great that's going to be also happening at COP29 will be the launch of the high-level dialogue of the fund and funding arrangements for the loss and damage. And I think this is an important moment to bring together the key actors and the key principles of the organizations that have to think of how do you change your procedures and policies and protocols of your organizations to be aligned with the 1.5 world, because the business as usual is not going to help, especially the most vulnerable countries. So, climate change is affecting all of us, but it's not the same because some have different access to resources, technology, and capacity. And therefore, it's really important for us to work as a community to bring us all up in this process. So I'm hoping that we do get specific sub-goal for adaptation, because we need to do adaptation very well in order to not go into the territory of loss and damage. And that is really important for small island states. We need coastal protection, we need the water and sanitation systems, and we need ways to diversify our livelihoods and do all of these things. And adaptation is not something that's seen as, there's no profits to be gained, but there's a lot of lives to be saved. And so I think it's really important that we work more on the preventative side, so we actually don't have to rely on the loss and damage fund as much as we have to. So the goal has to be to prevent and also adapt and not go into the territory of loss and damage, but that's not the reality now. And so I really hope that we're able to find innovative ways of getting the kinds of finance that's required for adaptation, which also includes concessional finance, also grants, and other ways of ensuring that countries that need this the most are able to access it and do adaptation well. So I transgress a little bit there to Kaveh, but
Thank you, Haja. I really appreciate that. And also for, in addition to loss and damage, mentioning adaptation, I was really encouraged by the fact that the incoming COP29 presidency mentioned that as a priority, because it can often drop off the agenda. And also the COP28 presidency really, I think one of the great outcomes of COP28 was the agreeing of the framework at a time when everyone's attention was looking at other things. The presidency did really well. You mentioned the overall sort of finance flows and MDB reform in passing. The last 3 COPs have actually had references to MDB reform. Do you think COP29 needs to do some more to keep pushing on that?
yes, of course. And I think each COP has, of course, put the pressure more and more. And some would argue that this might not be the right space to do that. But I think COP and the decision text of the COP is an excellent place to put the right signals to the outside of the UNFCCC, because we can only reach these ambitious outcomes by the coordination of the and better coherence of the inside of the UNFCCC with the outside world to reach the scale and to do everything at the level that's required to address a climate emergency, because we are in an emergency. The 1.5 is very near, and there are lots of people that are affected. So I think that working in silos is not going to be the way. And I think that if we could do more coordination on for instance, for adaptation, I could also think that we could also the MDBs could also do something about making the finance for adaptation cheaper or more innovative. There's other mechanisms of make it more accessible, because lots of the countries like the Maldives, we are heavily in debt, but we also have climate impacts. We also middle income countries, which makes it difficult for us to go to the market and then borrow money to do our adaptation, which further puts us back in the debt circle. And it's a vicious cycle in a sense. So we need to find a way to address the debt crisis, create more fiscal space, create the incentive for MDBs. It's going to be a win-win for everybody to focus on the reforms and also to coordinate with the inside of the UNFCCC with the outside, and not treat it in the siloed way that sometimes happen with our work in the convention.
Yeah, I mean, you also mentioned debt. I was at some meetings in the margins of the Summit of the Future, and sort of hearing the fact that developing countries are collectively paying more in debt servicing than they're receiving in ODA does seem a bit, at least to say, inefficient as a way of distributing finance. So this is just a mention to the audience that please, if you have questions, keep them in your head. We will come at the end, and also online. There should be a Q&A function in the chat, so we'll hopefully involve people online. I'd now like to turn to Sandra. Sandra, you've been following the negotiations on the new collective quantified goal. Always a mouthful to say that, the NCQG, very closely, probably more closely than many in the room. Maybe you could get into some of the details by explaining what the current status of the negotiations are, why the new goal is so critical, and what are the main sticking points that need to be overcome in the short remaining weeks between now and COP29.
Thank you so much, Kaveh. Thank you so much, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here. Please allow me to start saying that the NCQG, the new collective quantified goal, is not only a critical decision for COP29. I think it's so far, is the most important decision that we have on climate finance. And allow me to explain a little bit more about why. This goal is the goal that will substitute and improve, hopefully, what happened with the 100 billion. And why it needs to be different. Let's mention 3 elements. The 100 billion was a political decision, now we are not only talking about a political decision. Of course, will be political, but we have been discussing the NCQG for the last 3 years. All the technical elements that are needed to build this decision are in the table. The second element is that this NCQG has to take into account the needs and priorities of developing countries. And this is a very important part because the design is not only to talk about a quantity, but also a quality. And this is the third element that makes this decision a very important decision, not only to increase the money, but also to make it more effective. And at the end of the day, what we want is to reduce emissions, to reduce vulnerability. And if we do not consider these quality elements, can be more difficult to get there. So yes, we have been talking about this NCQG for the last 3 years. We discussed during 11 technical dialogues. We had different rounds of submissions, and we have a couple of ministerial conversations. Now we are passing from the technical discussions to the political scenarios. And of course, there are different moments that will be critical to achieve a good decision before the COP. There are a lot of complicated conversations. There are several complicated conversations. I will mention 4 just for the sake of time. The first one, and I think this is very important for all of us to think about it, and is what is the purpose of this new collective goal? According to some parties, this collective goal should be part of Article 9, which talks about the provision and commitments that developed countries have to developing countries in terms of providing support to reduce emissions and increase adaptation to vulnerability. The second element is some other parties consider that this NCQG is not only part of Article 9, but should be also part of Article 21C, which talks about making all financial flows align with this Paris Agreement. And this first, that may sound more or less obvious, has another complication that goes to the second point. What are the sources that have to be part of this NCQG? According to some parties, the main sources should be public and should come mainly from developed countries. According to other parties, this NCQG should include not only public resources, but also private resources and other innovative resources. And according to these parties, the provision of resources shouldn't come only from developed countries, but also from other emerging economies in the capacity to do so. And there is another complicated conversation, which is where is the money going? For certain parties, it's very, very important that this goal not only includes provision for mitigation and adaptation, but clearly for loss and damage as well. And according to other groups, loss and damage shouldn't be part of the NCQG. And the other element that is complicated in the conversation is the actual number. What is the amount? What is needed? We know that 100 billion are not enough, but how much? For certain parties, we should be talking about trillion because we know that billion are not enough. According to the last needs report, we are talking about 5.9 trillion that we need for the implementation of NDCs by 2030. Other parties haven't been putting some numbers out there. They comment that, yeah, it's recognized that billion may not be enough, but there are not so many options out there. So as you can see, there are different perspectives in what is this NCQG. But I would say that this NCQG is highly relevant, not only to reassure to developing countries this historical commitment that exists to continue supporting those that have the least responsibilities in the context of climate change, but it's reassuring that the system works, that it is support, that the convention is responding to the different conditions, to the principles that the convention has. And let's not forget that these resources will be also critical to continue the pathway increasing the ambition of the NDCs. We are in this process to updating NDCs, and for many countries, there are a lot of efforts already happening in the ground, but in order to increase the ambition, more money will be needed. And this NCQG approved in COP29 will be able to send that message to the NDCs to increase that ambition in the next round of the NDCs, and of course, NAPs and other critical documents. So yes, it's a highly important conversation, and hopefully the COP29 will be the place to approve and to really have a very strong NCQG.
Thanks, Sandra. I mean, you mentioned towards the end there the link between the finance goal at COP29 and the NDCs, which are due just a couple of months later. The 5.9 trillion figure that you mentioned is actually acknowledged by consensus of parties in the decision coming out of COP28. Of course, the big argument will be to what extent is public finance an element of that, and who pays for that. But maybe something not so technical. I mean, are you confident that we're going to get an outcome at COP29? Are you optimistic?
Well, more than confident and optimistic, I would say that the important element that we all have to take here is that we need a decision. There are no decision scenario shouldn't be in our conversation. A decision is needed. We know that it's not going to be perfect, as all the decisions that we have so far, but it's the decision that has to change the continuation of the Paris Agreement. I would say that there are three elements that, in my point of view, need to be part of this decision. The first one is at the very center of the NCQG needs to be a public finance commitment from developed to developing countries to reassure the responsibilities, but also this commitment to continue increasing ambition. I do believe that it's important to include not only adaptation, mitigation, but also loss and damage. There is a commitment there was created a fund, and this NCQG and that fund there needs to be a connection between these two. And at the end of the day, this NCQG has to reassure and at the end of the day, support developing countries. So this NCQG has to be that track. And don't forget, there will be other spaces such as the Article 2.1c to continue mobilizing further resources, but those elements are very, very important to keep building trust across parties. And I would say that in those elements rely the success of COP29. The good news is that a lot of countries agree on the fact that this NCQG has to include important qualitative elements such as access and debt treatment. And I think most of the countries agree on that, not quite sure how, and we are on that technicality, but I think it's good, and we see some convergences, opportunities, and we hope that both sides of the table will be able to achieve to something that will be transformative for the world.
Thank you, Sandra. I think the COP29 presidency will be relieved that you're optimistic. But speaking about optimism, I have to say, turning to Hannah, I don't think I've met anybody who's more optimistic and is always with a smile, even away from the cameras in the stressful moments of COP28. And I think was actually the ambassador for happiness for the UAE, which is probably why. So, Hannah, I mean, COP28 exceeded the expectations of many, including mine. Although I was always optimistic that it would be a good outcome, I think it really did exceed expectations. And as part of that, as Yalchin mentioned, were the targets and signals agreed as part of the outcome from the GST, things like the tripling renewable energy, transitioning away from fossil fuels, early warning systems for all. Are you seeing progress towards those? Are you happy that we're on track towards delivery? And what would you like to see coming out of COP29 to take those forward?
Thank you very much, Kaveh, and thank you for bringing us together. It's a wonderful reunion of friends and family in New York, on the panel, in the audience, and online. I absolutely have to say that when we first started on this COP28 journey back in 2021, we requested an early decision because of this mammoth global stocktake, which is the first time the world was trying to figure out where we were since Paris, where we need to go, how we're going to get there. And I would say that my former title had been Happiness Representative at the UN in New York, that my current unofficial title was the Recovering Optimist. when we started to look at the scale of the challenge and exactly what it was that we had to do, which just got scarier over time. And so I say this with all the reassurance to both the COP29 and COP30 presidency, that it is exactly the people in this room that got us through there, so that by 2023, my title became Aspiring Chief Celebration Officer. And to Sandra's point, it's not just about whether we think things can be done. It's about being determined to do it. And I think that's where we reached last year. I think at this point last year, we reached a turning point where all parties and partners realized, in looking at the science, that we have, of course, a window of opportunity, in looking at the political interest and the political desire for an outcome. They realized that actually everyone would benefit from an outcome. And in looking at what it was that the stocktake could do, there was a desire to shape something or craft something that could create a roadmap to keep 1.5 within reach, but more than that, to boost our ability to deliver on our development plans, to chart just transitions, to figure out how we can get to Todd's point on delivering on the science, but also on equity, how we can look at whether, reducing emissions, supercharging adaptation, but also addressing loss and damage for the first time in history, changing that from a liability conversation to one about solidarity, where we're all in this together. And when we're looking forward towards COP29, what we need to really do, to building on Sandra's point, is look at, well, how are we going to do that, right? So we need to have an NCQG that can be robust, that answers to the needs, that meets the scale of the climate challenge, but also, frankly, that proves that we're serious, right? That proves that we're serious, that when we came together and charted a roadmap to 1.5 in the UAE consensus, that we're also serious about delivering on that. And more than that, what needs to happen this year is then what we're working on, laser focused on as the Troika, together with Azerbaijan and Brazil, is how it is that we're going to get NDCs that also deliver on that challenge. And so the other reason why we absolutely have to have a strong outcome this year, and why everyone in this room and beyond needs to support the incoming presidency on that, is because we won't have the NDCs that we expect without that. There's a timeline for a reason. The February timeline comes in at a time when parties and developing countries in particular will have the reassurances that international cooperation will be there to be able to support on more ambitious NDCs, but also that we will have the know-how, the willingness, and the ability to work together towards just, orderly, equitable transitions that leave no one behind. And so the whole of the agenda ideally comes together. Practical Article 6 outcomes, transparency framework, as Yalchin mentioned, that keeps us on track. Progress on the UAE BLM work program on building resilience and on the adaptation side. All of that needs to come together. I have to give a shout out to all of those that are working really hard on this. We have Cecilia from the Secretariat. We have the SB chairs, of course, Harry and Nabil, who are veterans and hopefully can use the last months of their term to really push parties to the brink so that they can be proud of the outcomes as well. But also Joe Tyndall, who's been looking at the progress on the 100 billion and how it is that actually from the OECD side, we're looking at how that's going forward and where it is that we can continue to build trust and continue to demonstrate that the support is there where it's required. I have to give credit to Haja and build on her work as a transitional committee member last year. It was remarkable to see how she brought that idea of coordination together, and hopefully we'll be able to see that moving forward. But that idea of synergies, not just within loss and damage context, but the synergies between what we're doing on climate action and overall development frameworks, as something we spoke about in Rio. And thank you very much, Lilian, for the hospitality on that conversation, and Kaveh for your partnership on that as well. That synergies concept that I think is central to the work here at New York Climate Week cannot just be, I think, a tagline or a hashtag, but really needs to go into sort of how we're working through to be able to really achieve systems transformations and to really achieve what we need to do. And maybe just a final note on what we need to do and answering the original question. Yesterday, the IEA released a report at the Renewable Summit that was convened just down the road. And for us to achieve the full COP28 outcome, what they found is that the world needs to achieve a global storage capacity of 1,500 gigawatts. and build or modernize 25 million kilometers of grids, that we need to achieve a share of electricity in final energy consumption of 30%, and of course achieve existing goals on clean cooking as well as efficiency around the board. Where we are now is a deeply inequitable structure, right? So we see in emerging economies, they receive about 1/5 of the investments that are going into developed countries. And all of that, I guess, needs to go into sort of what we're looking at as a holistic approach to be able to keep our targets within reach. We have seen great progress. We have seen a great need to sort of connect the dots in order to make things forward. But we're also seeing a great need to have strong outcomes this year so that every COP is an important COP. This one is absolutely critical. And certainly from the COP28 presidency perspective, we're honored to be working with Azerbaijan and Brazil as truly determined colleagues and wonderful brothers and sisters to be able to work with all parties to get this across the line. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. You mentioned, or you underlined what Sandra said about being critical to get an outcome here. I was also really at COP29 on finance, but I was really encouraged by what the COP29 presidency included in the list of priorities, which was the COP28 follow-up. And I think the innovation of the Troika under your presidency it seems to be really bearing fruit in terms of having that continuity that's welcome. I couldn't help smile when you mentioned loss and damage, because I predicted COP27 would never establish the loss and damage fund, and I predicted COP28 would not capitalize the loss and damage fund. It was like utterly wrong on both counts. Thank you.
It's only impossible until it's done.
You will look for the impossible to be done again at COP29. So finally, again, if you have questions, please keep them in your head, because we're going to turn to Q&A shortly. But I really am very happy to welcome Lilium, who is the final representative of the Troika here. And we're obviously all looking forward to Berlin after COP29. Everyone who knows Lilium likes her because she always says what she thinks. So I'm looking forward to you saying what you think here as well. I mean, generally, you're going to be responsible for this in not the distant future. What thoughts have you heard? What comes to mind from what you've heard from the panel? But also, of course, at the moment, you have the leadership of the G20, and the leaders will meet during COP29. So can we expect some outcome from that really injects momentum towards the final days? So you have the floor, Lilium.
Thank you, Kaveh. Thank you for the invitation. Your events are always have a very good agenda. Congratulations. Well, I would start by saying that I disagree with Sandra that the NCQG or that the finance decision is the most important one that we have to work. I think what we should be given importance now is to a symbolic decision that came out from COP28 in the last days of the COP. So there was this decision establishing a youth champion. And I think, it's a symbolic decision because we had before that only a high-level champion. Now it's a person who helps the presidents to engage other stakeholders within the process. And now we have this youth champion. And they fight very bravely to have more space, to participate, to be part of the decisions that governments take at this conference. And I think this is nice, was a very positive outcome. I would like to give importance to that, because in the end of the day, it's the youth that will benefit or will suffer from the decisions, the kind of decisions, the quality of the decisions that we are taking now. So I use this as an inspiration that we must find every solution in every pillar of the climate regime, finance being one of them. And by saying that, I wanted to also pick up something that Sandra has said, that I think that is very, sometimes is disregarded. There is a link between ambition and implementation. Whether we like it or not, it's what is there in the agreements. No, so in the convention, there is even an article that says that mitigation in developing countries depends on the degree of support that they will get. And we have many examples of this. For example, in a session in Bonn this year, during the dialogues about the implementation of the GST, there was a presentation showing that within the least developed countries, 82% of their NDCs were conditional, meaning that they would implement their climate policies if they would get the support they need to finance those policies. So we often oversee this link. No, so this comes back to the importance of the decision to be taken in Baku, because it's not, hopefully it's not only be a sign that the support will be there, but also, as we were saying here by the panelists, you know, this new step on climate finance, it should give more a clear sense of accessibility, how these resources will be more easy to access. You know, what they will be a certainty that they will be there, that the funds, the climate funds that Yalchin was mentioning, 6, 7, 5 climate funds, they will have resource to keep working with the mitigation and adaptation projects. So this link exists, and we need to recognize it, whether we like it or not. And so the importance of giving the opportunity to put climate finance in another level, as science, as the IPCC says, it is needed in 2024, is an enabling part of the whole work that has to be done.
Thanks, Lilian. And I mean, points well taken, and it's there's definitely seems to be enough money in the global economy. It's about getting it to go in the right places. I'm optimistic for COP29 because the ministerial meetings that I've observed this year, ministers from around the world are agreed that public finance is critical at the center of whatever happens at COP29, but they also, all the ones I've heard from all the different countries, have said that that will never be enough to meet the scale that's needed, and the answer has to be somewhere in there. And I think it's really welcome that the Brazilian presidency of the G20 is at least thinking about novel ways of generating finance flows, because those ideas really need to come through. So thank you very much for that. I'd now like to take some questions in the room. I don't know if people have questions. I'm going to, Lisa just beat you, Alden, so I'm going to go Lisa Freedman, New York Times. If yes, you're going to get one. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisa Freedman from the New York Times. This has been such a... Hello? Yeah, okay. This has been so helpful. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry to be US-centric, but the presidential election in the US does loom over COP29. It'll take place just a few days before Baku, and there's a 50-50 chance that the winner will withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement and global climate cooperation. So I'm wondering, at this stage, 10 years past the Paris Agreement, what are the implications if the US does withdraw? And for folks not from the US, I'm also hoping if you could talk about what discussions you're having. Like in Marrakesh, folks were really flat-footed. Is there going to be a coordinated response? Are you talking about this within your delegations? What is the message that you're going to send, excuse me, if the next US president is antagonistic to what you're doing here? Thank you.
So just let's go to Alden and give the panel time to think, particularly Todd, who I'm going to throw under the bus for that one. So Alden.
Yeah, Alden Meyer from E3G. I want to continue a conversation some of us had with Lilian and Hannah in Bonn on 1.5 aligned NDCs, because that's the big discussion now. What does it mean to be 1.5 aligned? I think there was agreement there that we're not going to get agreement on any methodology or exact criteria for what it is, but I posited that we know what it isn't, which is an NDC that envisions continued production and export of fossil fuels. And of course, this is an issue for both the current presidency, the incoming presidency, and the next presidency of Brazil, about how do we deal with what is 70% of the problem, fossil fuel production and use, and have explicit benchmarks in NDCs on that. So I'd like to hear, what the panel thinks about the likelihood of that happening in NDCs. We've had conversations with the US. I'm skeptical that regardless of what the outcome is on November 5th, whether the US will have benchmarks in its NDC. Obviously, if it's goes one way, there won't be an NDC of any significance. But just what do you think is the prospect for getting agreement on phasing down production of fossil fuels? That was a huge breakthrough we thought we got in Dubai. And in Bonn, it seemed like there was collective amnesia about it. We had forgotten that the paragraph on the transition in the energy sector away from fossil fuels. What hope and optimism can you give us on that?
So let's take those two questions first, simply because I can't hold more than two questions in my head. Some people can hold five. My limit is two. Todd, can I throw you under the bus on the election?
Well, I'm going to do a very quick one comment on Alden's question. Maybe two quick things. I think that a little bit of clarity maybe with respect to the kind of things that we need to see from countries. I would think if we're talking about the US, the EU, other major developed countries, we need to see something. I think that we will see something that's up over 60. Maybe it'll be 2/3 in terms of cuts. I don't know this yet. I'm not working with the government, and so this is just speculation on my part, but I think it will be significant. I think with respect to China, we're going to need to see something. If we're serious about where we need to go, I think we're going to need to see something in the range of a 30% cut against their peaking level which they're at right now. So that's what I think about those things, and I emphatically agree with your comment about not letting the transitioning away paragraph die. I mean, for me, that would be a deal breaker. I mean, literally, I think that you cannot let that go. That was enormously important. And if anybody thinks we're going to go through this COP and sort of have that disappear, I just wouldn't do it. Again, I'm not talking to the American team at all. I'm really on my own, but I think it's that important in my view. With respect to the presidential, look, it's as close as you say, Lisa. It's a 50-50 kind of deal. I'm never overly optimistic or overly pessimistic in life, but my little bit of my optimist side thinks that the Democrats are going to win, but it's tight. And my expectation is certainly if Trump wins, that he'll pull us out and he'll go into the same kind of mode that happened last time. And my expectation is that no other countries around the world will do that. And I can't speak for my colleagues here, so I'll let them speak. But my guess is that there is not a lot of planning going on. I might be wrong, but I think that there's so much need to focus on getting through the COP itself that long conversations about what happens if it's Trump, I would guess aren't happening so much, but maybe I'm wrong.
Would anyone else like to come in on either of those? We've got further questions.
I would have just a quick reply to your question. I don't think that the prospects of the election in the US or in any other countries, they affect too much the negotiation mood. I don't see in the rooms where we discuss how to advance, how to progress. I don't see that there is this fear or that things will derail and what will happen. It's really my perception that it doesn't exist. Also, we have to take into account that governments pass and the states stay. These agreements, the Convention on Climate Change, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreements, they are taken by the states, and the states are different from governments. So this is, a government can take a country out of an agreement, and then it won't be reached by its commitments. But, in the end of the day, the agreements will prevail. And that's what we have to hope for.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Hannah.
Happy to, that's very well said, Lilium. I also noticed a lot of negotiators in the room today, so I'm sure they would also have their responses, including the one that had the statistic on LDC's conditional reports, as Manjit over there in the room. But from what I hear from my colleagues in the room, and I think is an answer probably to both your questions, Lisa and Fred, is the focus right now is looking at coming out of COP28, where we, I think, collectively as an international community prove that multilateralism is alive and that it's well and that it can deliver. There is this determination to deliver and to turn that into ambition. So when we speak with colleagues that are negotiators, a lot of them are involved in implementation in their own countries. They're involved in preparing their updated NDCs. And to do that, a lot of them are looking at the GSD outcomes. They're not going anywhere. They are enshrined in public policy. And in looking at how their country could contribute to achieving that then global goal. It doesn't mean that every single country needs to triple renewables. For China, they've already way exceeded and done the tripling already 10 years ago. Brazil as well, I'd argue the UAE as well. And so it's not individual countries tripling, but how do you contribute to the global goal? And I think then, independent of which government is in power, if we are able to actually make the synergies between climate goals and development goals clearer, then what you are doing is actually contributing to the overall achievement of this. We're able to continue tracking it. We're able to work with all institutions, but also all levels, right? So cities have played a huge role coming out of Paris to find implementation at the local level. It'll apply especially for adaptation targets and implementation on that side. So the momentum we don't see going anywhere. The commitment that we see among colleagues in the rooms is infectious and here to stay, I think, absolutely. And the trust that we have in the process I think will prevail. And of course, we look forward to working with all parties towards that outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, Sandra, just before we go, I've got 3 more questions online, and one of them is for you. So I'd rather direct that one to you because we're running out of time. From a personal reflection for Lisa's question, I agree with Lilium that this hasn't loomed in the conversations that I've been having with negotiators, and it's partly also that people can only worry about what they can control, which is not that for most people. So the 3 questions that we have online are, to let people think about them, what, if any, steps are being taken to include young people in the high-level dialogue at COP29? So that maybe is one for Lilium and Hannah to think about as the troika. We also have, are there any policy solutions that can regulate capital markets to incentivize them toward climate action, which is from Laetitia Charbonneau. So that's probably one I'm going to send to you, Sandra. And then the other question is, what kind of results from CBD COP16 would be needed to further develop the interconnection between climate and biodiversity? Is there room for COP29 to address interconnected crises? And that's from Juan Gomez, who's the first secretary for Colombia in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So, I mean, that last point is we have a number of COPs that are happening this year, and they all kind of relate to climate. So those are the 3 questions. So I'm going to go first, I think, to Sandra, if I can, on are there policy solutions that could incentivize and regulate capital markets towards climate action?
Awesome. Please let me also just answer a very quick point about the US election. Because it's true, there in different rooms, there is this feeling that if Trump wins, then that's it for the UN system and the climate system and all these systems. And let me be a little bit, I don't know, cynical here. I think the times have been changing a lot. In the past, one of the fears was about to what extent the actions would kind of the impacts in finance mainly, no? Like, because as we know, like the US were providing resources to the GCF and other mechanisms. But I think now the feeling is different. Of course, if you put it in, there are 2 levels. If he gets out of the Paris Agreement, that doesn't mean that climate change doesn't exist even in the US, no? Like as the IPCC said, you can deny as many times as you want climate change, but that doesn't mean that doesn't exist. And the US is an extremely vulnerable country as well, and they will deal with climate change within the country, in or outside of the Paris Agreement. But in the second line, I would say that there are different mechanisms that now don't rely on US money anymore. And I see like other mechanisms creating more space for action beyond the US. And I think this is interesting because, as Lilian was saying, actions are happening in every single country. Every single country has NDCs, regulations, and many other. Of course, the finance will kind of allow that to improve in terms of, like accelerate. So I think this is a matter of accelerating. And I am, yes, I mean, we are all discussing about that, but I couldn't say that that's the end of the climate action in the world. And of course, coming back to the decisions, that's why it's important to think in the two levels. No, the NCQG has a very, very important essence in terms of supporting developing countries in accelerating these actions. But also we are talking about the Article 2.1c, for those that are not familiar, is in the core of the Paris Agreement and is talking about the shifting and really transforming all the financial flows. And that's the space where more talks about regulation policies are bringing together to incentivize the participation of the private sector, because we know that the NCQG won't cover all the needs, and it's important to have a universe of different resources. That's why the reform of the financial institutions is critical. The tax convention is critical. These proposals in the context of the G20, taxing the richest. There are several mechanisms that are being discussed out there to transform a bigger number of financial flows, and all that is happening. So I think the messages and the signals are out there as well.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Just to give a chance to all the questions we've had online to be answered. Lilian, you mentioned the youth champion, the appointment. Does Brazil have any plans for youth involvement for COP30? It's a bit early to say maybe, but you've already highlighted the importance of that innovation.
Yes, we feel there is an urge to more participation. We think it's very legitimate. The young generations, they have much at stake as far as climate change goes. So we are presently trying to select a youth champion and to build with this person and with Brazilian civil society to design, a plan to give them real influence. But we have still a COP to go, so we'll have time to that.
Thanks, Lilian. I'm going to ask Hannah to maybe touch on this question from Juan on the interaction between the various COPs, the CBD. We have the desertification. Are the Troika interacting with those in the context of the UNFCCC? Are you having contact with those regimes as well?
I would actually want to give the mic to my brother and friend Roshan, as the Troika as a formal mechanism doesn't have the mandate for that. But the Troika, as the three presidencies, have of course had multiple interactions across the Rio conventions, and is looking certainly at how it is we can have those synergies and those outcomes in what is a year of environmental conferences, for lack of a better term, to make sure that they're not just a series of events that people go to, but that there is kind of synergistic progress across all of them. Of course, most of you know well that we had UNEA earlier in the year, that we had opportunities through even the Pact for the Future for there to be follow through and support, including for the outcomes of the UAE consensus on transitioning away from fossil fuels, on renewables, on efficiency, on adaptation and finance, etc. We'll have coming up shortly then the CBD COP, and Colombia have been, I think, laser focused on looking at how it is that we can ensure synergies across the conventions as well. And then, of course, after Baku and after we celebrate the success of Baku, we will have then the Convention on Desertification. I think you've seen numerous engagements of the incoming COP president, but also his team directly with them. And I know that all our governments are actively engaging to ensure that those work together. More on this line of implementation moving forward. On the youth point, I thank you, Lilium, for flagging that. I think that you've seen in the two youth champions that we have from the UAE and Azerbaijan a real potential for sort of that role to provide the strong link to the presidency and shaping the presidency's work in bringing youth priorities into the work of the presidency in a way that hopefully leads to more empowerment and buy-in of a very significant part of society, particularly in developing countries where you have 60% of the population being youth, not just being sort of bystanders, but actually being empowered to propose solutions, to propose ways forward, to propose innovative ways that we can supercharge implementation, which is where we are right now, I think is a critical part of that work. I think we have a great example from this year, and I know that our youth champion has really enjoyed working with the Azerbaijani youth champion. They had an engagement just yesterday plotting for how this role could add more meaningful impact moving forward, and I'm excited for that, what that means from Baku to Belém. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. I remember hearing the first speech of the UAE Youth Champion in Bonn last year, and it was very impressive indeed. And of course, I think some statistic like half the world's population is under 30 now, so it's pretty important to involve that constituency. So I'm going to give the final words to close out to Haja and Todd, if they would like them. Any sort of reflections that you would have, or passing advice maybe for the COP29 presidency.
Sure. Thank you very much, Kaveh, and for this whole event. I guess I would say two reflections, going back again to banging away on this point that Alden made on not allowing the transition away from fossil fuels to disappear. I would just invoke the what has now become the watchword of Kamala Harris's campaign: we're not going back. We should keep going forward in that. On that program. And then on finance, I would just underscore, I'm not going to get into a whole dissertation here, but I would underscore the importance of the inside, the UNFCCC, and the outside. And the inside is very much all focused for good reason on the NCQG, and that's as it should be. And I wish everybody good luck in being able to square that circle. But there's also tremendous potential in the world outside of the UNFCCC, where real finance ministers and real people who have expertise in this area could make real strides. And I would particularly direct people's attention to the report put out by India at the G20. And the G20s have been very active in this area just in general, but the G20 last year, the Indians prepared a report called the Triple Agenda. There's a volume 1 and 2, and I would focus even more on volume 2. And it's a set of quite concrete, quite specific reforms that could be made in the World Bank and the multilateral development banks, bringing in the national development banks, which, if done right, could maybe not produce trillions, but could certainly start producing hundreds of billions over a period of a few years. You need a very committed World Bank leader to do that, and you need very committed shareholders at the World Bank, starting with the United States, and being not so cautious that you won't take any risk. You have to be prepared to take some risk, but the risk of not acting is much greater than the risk of going over some line here or there. So that's what I would say.
Thanks, Todd. And that's a good preview of the full meetings of the World Bank just a few weeks ago. So we'll look forward to that and the outcome of the G20 finance ministers as well. And I look forward to the signed copy of my book in October as well. Haja, you have the final word.
Thank you. I think Todd has very eloquently said a lot of the key messages going forward. But I think one thing that we should be mindful is that we're in the halfway point of the critical decade to keep the 1.5 alive. And this is the moment to take action and to mobilize finance and resources and get the capacities and the technologies to lift people up to be able to do ambitious NDCs next year and to also land the global goal and adaptation framework and to set us up for success with the next cycle of the GST and for us to course correct, but also that would allow the most vulnerable populations of the world to not only survive, but also thrive in the future of the 1.5 and beyond. And I think we must remain hopeful, even in the midst of all the geopolitical and difficult fiscal and financial discussions we're in the midst of. And so I really want to remain hopeful and wishing the COP29 to be a real success that has tremendous impact on the most vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you, Haja, for that. And I'm also very hopeful. I think really the combination of COP28, COP29, and COP30 has all the elements for really sowing the seeds of genuine transformation. So I think all the potential is there, and I think we have to support the Troika and the incoming presidencies for that. So with that, I would really like to thank the panel for taking their time away, especially the negotiators who are away from presidents and leaders and ministers. So hugely grateful for that. Thank you also to the audience in the room for being here, similarly busy, and those online. A final plug, there's QR codes on your seats to our latest papers. Please do read them. They're excellent. I can say that because I didn't write them. It was my team. And also it should be in the chat online as well. But thank you very much. And I think a round of applause to the panel.